In a small, quiet town where time seemed to move slower than anywhere else, life went on peacefully. Among the people who walked the cobbled streets and visited the old markets each day, there was a hidden story of love and longing that still lingered. Alice, a kind and passionate young woman, was one of the town's familiar faces. She worked at a small bookstore in the heart of town, a place filled with the warm scent of aged pages and the whispers of stories waiting to be told. Every morning, before the sun fully rose, Alice would unlock the store's door, breathing in the fresh morning air. She loved the peacefulness of those early hours when the town was still asleep. It was in those quiet moments that she felt closest to her memories, especially to one memory that was always on her mind: her first love, James. James had been her childhood friend, and as they grew older, friendship turned into something deeper. But like many young love stories, theirs was marked by a bittersweet ending. James had to leave the town for university, promising Alice that he would return someday. They had written letters at first, filled with hope and dreams for the future. But over time, the letters became less frequent, and eventually, they stopped altogether. Alice never knew exactly why the letters stopped. She wondered if he had found a new life, a new love, or perhaps he had simply moved on. Yet, every morning as she opened the bookstore, a small part of her heart held on to the hope that James would one day return, walking through the door with a smile, just like he used to. Years passed, and Alice's life continued in the gentle rhythm of the town. She learned to find joy in her work, in the friendships she had, and in the simple beauty of her surroundings. But deep down, a part of her heart still felt unfinished, like a book with the last page torn out. One misty autumn morning, as Alice arranged new books on the shelves, the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, expecting to see one of her regular customers, but instead, a tall figure stood in the doorway. Her heart skipped a beat. It was James. He looked older, his face more mature, yet there was something unmistakably familiar in his warm eyes. "Hello, Alice," he said, his voice soft and filled with a mix of joy and hesitation. Alice felt a whirlwind of emotions. She wanted to rush to him, to ask why he hadn't written, but a part of her held back, afraid of reopening old wounds. Alice took a deep breath, steadying herself as she looked into James's familiar eyes. The memories they had shared rushed back to her, filling her with warmth and a touch of pain. She nodded slightly, inviting him to step further into the store. He took a few steps closer, his eyes scanning the shelves as if remembering the place and all it meant to both of them. "It's been a long time, James," Alice finally managed to say, her voice almost a whisper. He nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "Too long. I wasn't sure if you'd still be here, but I hoped." The silence that settled between them was thick with unspoken words, 1,000 questions dancing in Alice's mind. Why hadn't he written? What had kept him away for so long? And yet, a part of her was afraid of hearing the answers, afraid of the truth that might break the delicate hope she had held onto for years. James took a deep breath, as if sensing her hesitation. "I know I owe you an explanation, Alice," he began softly. "When I left for university, everything was so new and exciting, but it was also overwhelming. I felt lost, like I didn't belong there. And with each day, I felt myself drifting further from the life I knew, the life we had." He paused, his hands fidgeting slightly. "At first, I wrote to keep that connection alive, to hold on to you. But the more I struggled to find myself, the harder it became to share that with you. I didn't want to bring you into my confusion. I thought it would be kinder to let you go." Alice felt a mixture of anger and sadness welling up inside her. "Kinder," she echoed, her voice trembling. "Do you have any idea what it felt like, waiting day after day, hoping to hear from you, wondering if I had done something wrong?" James's face softened, regret filling his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Alice. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now how wrong I was." They stood in silence, the weight of their shared pain lingering in the air. Finally, Alice spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you come back?" James looked down, gathering his thoughts before meeting her gaze again. "Because I never stopped thinking about you. No matter where I went or what I did, A part of me was always here with you. I had to see you, to tell you the truth, and to ask if there's any chance for us to begin again." Alice felt her heart pounding, torn between the desire to forgive him and the fear of being hurt again. She looked away, her eyes falling on a familiar book on the shelf, one they had once read together. In that moment, memories of laughter and stolen glances flooded her mind, reminding her of the love they had once shared. "I don't know, James," she said softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You left me with so many questions, so much pain. I don't know if I can just forget all of that." James stepped closer, reaching out as if to take her hand, but hesitating. "I don't expect you to forget, Alice, but maybe we could start with today, one day at a time." Alice looked up at him, her emotions swirling. The trust between them was broken, but the love, however faint, was still there, waiting for a chance to be rekindled. Alice felt a small flicker of warmth amidst the pain. One day at a time, that was something she could perhaps manage. She nodded slowly, allowing herself to take a small step toward healing, if not fully toward him just yet. "All right, James," she said quietly. "One day at a time." A gentle smile spread across his face, and she couldn't help but notice the way his eyes softened. They agreed to meet again the next morning at the cafe by the bookstore, a place they had often gone to as teenagers. The familiarity of it brought a sense of comfort to Alice, as if the pieces of her past were slowly aligning with the present. The next day, Alice arrived at the cafe a few minutes early, feeling both anxious and excited. She chose a seat by the window, her fingers tapping nervously against the table. Just as she began to wonder if he would show up, James entered, his gaze immediately finding hers. He smiled, and a hint of that old, familiar charm she remembered so well was there. They spent the morning talking, sharing stories of the years they had spent apart. James told her about the struggles he had faced, the times he had felt lost, and the moments of clarity that had brought him back to her. Alice listened, finding herself understanding more than she had expected. Over the following days, they fell into a gentle rhythm. Each day, James would bring a new story or a memory to share, slowly bridging the gap that had grown between them. And each day, Alice felt her heart opening just a little more, healing in ways she hadn't thought possible. One afternoon, as they walked through the town square, James stopped in front of a small jewelry shop. In the window was a simple silver locket, elegant and unassuming. He looked at it for a long moment before turning to Alice. "Do you remember the locket I gave you on your 16th birthday?" he asked. Alice's eyes widened. She had worn that locket every day until he left, keeping it as a symbol of their connection. But after he stopped writing, she had taken it off, unable to bear the constant reminder of what she had lost. "Yes," she replied softly. "I still have it, actually." James smiled, relief and joy in his eyes. "I hoped you would. I'm not asking you to wear it again, Alice. But maybe someday, if you're ready, it could mean something new." They continued their walk, and as the days turned into weeks, Alice found herself slowly rebuilding her trust in him. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when doubt crept back in, moments when the pain resurfaced. But every time, James was patient, understanding, never pushing her further than she was ready to go. As the weeks passed, Alice and James grew closer, their bond slowly mending with each shared memory and each new story. The cautious warmth between them began to turn into something deeper, rekindling the love they had once felt. But there was still a quiet hesitance in Alice's heart, a fear that this fragile new beginning could easily be broken. One evening, as they strolled by the lake under a sky painted with hues of orange and pink, James turned to Alice, his expression serious. "Alice, I've been thinking a lot about what's next for us," he said softly. "I know I hurt you and I don't want to rush anything, but I need to be honest with you. I'm ready to build a life here, if you'll have me." Alice felt a pang of joy mixed with worry. She looked out over the lake, gathering her thoughts before she spoke. "James, I've come to trust you again, little by little, but I don't want to make promises I'm not ready for." James nodded, understanding. "I don't need promises, Alice. Just knowing that we're trying is enough." Their walks by the lake became part of their routine, and with each evening, Alice felt herself growing more certain. She wanted to trust him completely, to take a leap and build a new future with him. But the shadow of their past still lingered, reminding her of how easily love could slip away. One late autumn night, as the first snow began to fall, James surprised Alice with a small dinner in the bookstore, filled with candles and the scent of warm spices. He had set up a little table between the bookshelves, and as they sat down to eat, Alice felt an overwhelming sense of belonging. This place, with him by her side, felt like home. "Do you remember when we used to come here after school and read poetry?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with nostalgia. Alice laughed, nodding. "Yes, and you would always choose the romantic poems. You were quite the dreamer." James smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I still am, and my biggest dream is to spend the rest of my life with you, Alice. I know I've made mistakes, and I know we still have a long way to go, but I promise, I'm here for good." Alice looked into his eyes, feeling the sincerity in his words. The fears that had held her back seemed to melt away in that moment, replaced by a quiet certainty. "James," she said softly, "I think I'm ready to trust you completely again." They embraced, the warmth of their love surrounding them like a cocoon in the dimly lit bookstore. And as the snow continued to fall outside, they knew they had finally found their way back to each other, their love stronger and more enduring than it had ever been.